What's up, everybody? I'm Jason, and welcome back to A Point in Focus, the official podcast for the Point in Focus YouTube channel. So this video is going to be going up on September the 21st, I think is when this is going to air, although I'm recording this like a week earlier, so it's possible that it could be out of date. And I've got a couple things I want to talk about today. Super quickly, I want to start with, I don't know, you could call it a channel status or channel update or whatever. Not so much on any specific project, but just sort of the channel as a whole. So over the course of the summer, I think it was June, July, and August, or at least July and August, I was posting basically 2 videos a week. I would have a regular R5, R5C, etc. tip video on Tuesdays, and then on Thursdays, I was posting a lens breathing test video. And this was a very, in some ways, nefarious way to try and get me, or not nefarious to you guys, but to me at least, to try and get more content going, because the reality is those lens breathing test videos are super easy for me to, or were super easy for me to do. They're only a 6-minute long video. They have a very structured format. I could shoot the tests, analyze the data, put the script together, and publish the video in, an hour. I could do 3 or 4 of them in a day easily, including all the setup time and all so forth between videos. Made it real easy to have two days or two content days a week. And I kind of started falling into the I want to have 2 content days a week. Reality is there's a lot of stuff I want to test, I want to talk about that I think is worth exploring in various ways throughout photography and cinematography, filmmaking, whatever. And so I got rolling with those 2-day-a-week videos, and then I started to think, well, I'll just try to keep this going. And I will carry that 2-day-a-week thing into what goes on, beyond when those videos have run out. So those videos have for the most part, run out. I've got one more lens to test. I will probably get around to it. I may bring them back at some point if I get a chance to do the tests with a friend of mine's Nikon gear. Not entirely sure. We'll see what happens with that. But that's pretty much run its course. Got me into this idea that I could I could maintain, mentally, thought process, whatever, that I could maintain 2 videos a week. And the reality is I can't. I was asked a while back why I only publish 1 video a week. Maybe this wasn't what the person intended, but the way I interpreted the question, why don't I publish more? And the reality is, and I've said this before, I am here. This is me. There is no editing team. There is no writing team. There's no multi-million-dollar corporation behind me. I go as fast as I can. And that's something that was a point that was actually driven home to me over the last couple of weeks, that I've been producing or trying to shoot 2 videos a week, which is I found that I was starting to rush. I was starting to feel that I needed to rush. I was starting to feel that I was having to push hard. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with working and pushing to get things done, at least up to the point that you don't burn yourself out doing it. But there is a problem when subconsciously you start thinking, I need to do this, I need to go, 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 go. And I started finding little errors. Nothing to the point where I was wrong, or I completely am leading people in the wrong direction, or I'm explaining something in a way that people don't understand. But little errors where I didn't think about something, or I omitted something that in retrospect should have probably been included, or would have helped make things clearer when it was included. Or in a recent video last Thursday, I posted the evaluation of the LPE6P batteries on the EOS R5C and what they provide. And it was pointed out to me that I didn't forgot to, or didn't include or consider the power zoom lenses and the Tascam, or the power output on the hot shoe, the multifunction shoe, in some of the discussion. Now, the reality is, and this is why I said it doesn't matter, that doesn't matter. That's stuff that gets disabled when the camera is on battery in the highest power situations, along with autofocus and so on and so forth. The camera is protecting itself, which was my point in the video. The camera is protecting itself and its battery against higher current draw, but that is something that can add and contribute to the current draw that you see when you have the camera plugged into USB power delivery. The mistake or omission, or however you want to put it, was the analogy that what I meant to be saying was that plugging the camera into USB power delivery and looking at the actual camera draw, the protected draw, is right in line with the power draw that you would expect from the industry standard consumer electronics standards for battery device stuff of a 1C draw on a 16 watt hour battery. Not that that's the only thing that the camera can draw, and that's the only potential reason. But my point here is that I should have caught that. I should have realized that in thinking through things, and almost certainly would have thought about that or realized that if I wasn't going essentially as hard and as fast as I can to keep this 2 video a week thing going with harder content. Because the reality is like I said, those breathing videos were real easy to shoot and do. Once you start getting to talk to the R5 tips, the R5C tips, the R5 Mark II tips, any of that stuff, the video introduction, the digital video concepts stuff, that takes a lot more time. And the right way to do it is to spend the time to make sure that that content is correct and completely inclusive of everything that it needs to be, and not omitting things because I'm hurrying to get through it. So as a result, I have decided I'm going to go back to a 1 to 1.5 video a week thing. I'm going to try to stay to 1.5 videos, which may end up kind of being 2 videos if I keep doing these kind of podcasts on an every other week basis. So every other week there's a podcast, and then every other week there might be a second tech video happening. I want to keep the core of every Tuesday is a focused tech video on the R5, the R5C, the R5 Mark II, and then hopefully I will be getting back to the digital video stuff as soon as I can. But again, this is the problem with being a one-man show. There's also the whole problem with trying to, for lack of a better word, capitalize on what's relevant, popular, and going on right now. The R5C is the hot new camera from Canon, and it feels like I need to talk about it. But as I said the last time I talked about the status or a status update on the channel, I'm not doing anything until the end of September. I want to be familiar with the camera. I have been so frustrated in my history of looking at videos or looking at reviews of camera gear, where you go see a day 1 review pretty much anywhere, and they only had the camera for a couple of days. Canon isn't sending these review sites like, a camera 6 months ahead of its release. They're sending them maybe a week or 2 at most. How much can you actually be familiar with the camera in a week or 2? And as a content provider on the camera, if I'm not familiar with the camera, then that's going to influence how I talk about it. You're going to run into things like changes in user interface design. And, the reality is nobody really likes change. A lot of people are maybe sometimes more tolerant of change, but change is always change. It always is something you have to get used to, and especially when it's a user interface related thing, that change is just something that you have to take the time to become comfortable with. Well, in 2 weeks, that's not going to really happen. And that's going to influence, I think, how you talk about the new menu layouts or the new control interface or the new way you get into video mode. That some people are just going to be over the moon about it, and maybe they're right, maybe they're not. Some people are going to be super negative about it because it's a change and they haven't gotten accustomed to it yet. And some people, like me, aren't going to or don't want to talk about it until we have the time with the camera to not have change be an influencing factor. So where was I going with this? Right. Going back to a slightly condensed or slightly relaxed schedule, it may even end up falling back to one video a week, but that is the schedule that I feel that I can comfortably and reasonably maintain and still put out the quality that I feel I want, or that I feel that I want to put out. I don't want to be rushed. As much as like the facts of trying to like, oh, if I can get this out, that this video can get better revenue or more views, build the channel following more, whatever. I mean, you know, that's great. It's certainly important for me and the channel growth. But on the same time, if that means cutting corners on the content, I don't want to do it. I want to deliver the best content I can deliver, the most accurate and complete content I can deliver, and not content that is shortcut just because, ooh, got to get it out. So on the side to that, actually, this is also a personal thing that I have run into. Not that it's like a big deal or anything, but I'm also having to reevaluate some of the stuff I want to do and how I'm going to be able to do it. I have a bad habit, problem, I don't know what you want to call it. I can generate ideas for videos faster than I can do the videos, especially when the idea involves a lot of testing or research or digging into things that's, you know, detailed, because that's generally what I'm doing. And I'm slowly learning. I'm not sure how successful I'm going to be at this, but I am slowly learning to understand that I can't do all of it. At least not with the current situation that I'm working in. I can't hit every dial and every knob and every button that I want to hit. So I'm trying to prioritize that, which of course also runs into an interesting problem in that, how do I prioritize that? What is more important to talk about? What is the most important stuff? Now, obviously, my priority for the most part is going to be on those four main series that I have running, the R5, R5 Mark II, R5C, and the digital video things, and not trying to go off too far into, you know, a field from that. Though I do have to at sometimes. Sometimes it's just necessary for the change. But how do I prioritize that? Especially when I'm running into things where I know some of you guys out there have asked me questions that maybe not ask me a question about that specific thing, but I know it's something that would be relevant to you as somebody who's starting on content creation or YouTube, or is working in a very tight space or setup, or can't, you know, dial out to, you know, a full-on studio environment or whatever. Things that I've found to do that, to work in tight spaces, to address that kind of situation. So there will be some of that tossed in, probably not as much as there is this September. This September, as an aside too, on the topic of the channel, this September I have kind of gone all over the place content-wise. And I know if you're on the channel for the specific R5 tips and R5C tips or whatever, it may feel like a huge departure to you. This was actually threefold in some respects. So remember I said I was spending the month at least to get comfortable with the R5 Mark II. So a lot of the content that I have been putting up this month has been shot with the R5 Mark II, at least in a B camera capacity, shooting somewhere around 50% or more maybe of the footage that you see. A camera stuff is still being done with the R5C, but I basically have almost all of the stuff that I've been working on, I have been trying to shoot as much of it as I can with the R5 Mark II, again, to build time behind the camera. Second, some stuff that just was going to be short had ballooned into a lot longer kind of discussion, or a lot larger kind of discussion. And instead of putting up one 40-minute video, I decided to break it down into logical steps, because I think they might be easier to find or more useful or something like that. But anyway, that's the state of the channel, and sort of where I'm trying to go, or what I'm going to try and be working through the rest of the year. Still going to be content, still going to be focused on the tech tips, but do expect, if that's not, if the what do I want to say, if the non-tech tip things aren't your thing, do expect to see some of that sprinkled in more often, largely as I work through problems in my other channel, which I think I talked about previously, which is a model railroading channel. So shooting stuff like that, as I work through problems there, as I work through problems and getting setups for that and for various other things, I'm going to bring that stuff up because I think it's useful for some of the people that are watching to have an idea on how somebody else is solving these problems. Okay, so with that out of the way, which is probably longer than I really wanted to talk about all of that, let me get to the meat of what I wanted to talk about in this video, which is some new product announcements from Canon. A camera, the cinema camera, the C80. I really don't have a lot to say about that. It's a C400 in a C70 package. It looks like it's probably going to be a really solid camera. I haven't done a ton of research on it, largely because both the C400 and the C70 are not things that I'm immediately interested in buying, which is weird because as much video as I shoot now, I'm still shooting on hybrid cameras, and the R5C, obviously, largely because of the photography side. I still fancy myself a photographer and still want the photography aspect of those cameras that you don't really have in the Canon cinema cameras, the R5C, the C400, etc. They're very much, yes, they can capture stills, but they are very much focused on video. So that's really all I have to say about those cameras. I'm sorry if you're interested in test data and whatnot. I'm not getting one of either anytime soon. I won't be looking at the setups and configurations, performance, etc. They do run the Cinema EOS OS, so a lot of the stuff they do is going to be very similar to the R5C in video mode, so some of that definitely will apply. I know I've spoken to a couple of people in the comments on videos who have R5Cs and are looking at C80s as a big brother, A cam, B cam, second cam, better cam, however you want to look at it. So the reality is a lot of what they're talking about or what you're looking at still is going to apply there. Which brings me to the bigger thing, that announcement that I actually want to talk about, which is the new lens that Canon announced late last week, the RF 28-70 f2.8L, or not L, STM. And maybe I'm missing a IS in there, because I'm pretty sure it's image stabilized. So, yeah, IS STM. So, this... obviously, I don't have one. I don't know if I'm going to buy one, honestly, but this is largely where I think camera lenses need to go, this kind of thing. I'm actually rather interested in this, largely due to the weight and the size, and, we'll see how things play out, obviously, but... this is the entry level as far as I see it. So if we rewind back to like 15 years ago and the death of the interchangeable lens camera market as smartphones and stuff came along, the narrative that all of the media sites, the camera media sites, whatever, photography press was pushing is that SLRs and mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras are dead. It's doomed. They're gone. The thing that's going to replace it is the smartphone. And of course, if you're a marketer for Apple or Samsung or whatever, that's the narrative you want to push. You want to push the idea that your smartphone, your iPhone, your Galaxy, whatever, is completely capable of replacing any other camera on the market, and you don't need an SLR or now a mirrorless. You don't need all that junk, all that weight. Just pitch to zoom in to get the picture of the bear that's 10 miles away, or just run up to punching distance to the bear and see how good that goes. We're not going to tell you which one to do, but you don't need an interchangeable lens camera. And of course, we saw the market numbers, the sales numbers decrease. The industry, wasn't selling as many cameras. And a part of the reality of all of this too is that cameras by the mid-2010 or the mid-2010s, interchangeable lens cameras were mature technology. We could talk about the sort of limitations that you can have in a camera sensor from like a physical perspective. You can keep adding resolution. You can keep making the thing go faster. You can make the camera's power budget higher and higher and higher and so forth to do more and more and more things. But in the end, the thing that everybody so often seems to forget is that they produce a picture and the consumer of that picture is us. And our eyes aren't getting better. We don't resolve more, we don't see better, we don't have better vision or qualities or whatever. There's only so much demand our eyes place on the pictures that we're looking at. And cameras by the mid-2015s had basically gotten to a point where they were beyond that level of performance. They just didn't need higher and higher resolution and so forth. Obviously more frames a second, better dynamic range, all of that stuff is improvements that we need or would like to see, I think, at least a lot of us. But from a technology perspective, cameras are getting to the point where they're not a clear cut, oh, this is so much better. And I've talked about this briefly in a previous video with the R5 and the R5 Mark II. The R5 Mark II does a lot of things better than the R5. It does a few things, very few things, worse than the R5. But the R5 is absolutely a credible contender, competent camera against the R5 Mark II. If, for example, you're a landscape photographer and you don't need 30 frames a second continuous burst, you don't need to spend the extra money on an R5 Mark II. The R5 will do the job for you as well, maybe even better than the R5 Mark II for actually a couple of reasons, but we're not going to get into them today. So my interpretation or perspective on the collapsing camera industry wasn't that it wasn't really collapsing, because that's not being honest. Sales did decrease, are down compared to their all-time high. My interpretation is that the bottom came up. So the first thing that smartphones absolutely decimated were compact point-and-shoot style cameras. Those weren't really good to start with, and when a smartphone can produce an image that's basically as good or better than that, then you don't really need your compact camera. You can carry your smartphone. And even if the image isn't quite as good as what you could get out of the compact camera, the smartphone's easier to carry, and the convenience factor kind of makes up for the difference. It also took out some of the entry-level mirror or interchangeable lens market. I knew people back in the late 2000s or mid-2000s, I had friends who bought DSLRs to take pictures and document their kids growing up because, well, they didn't have a smartphone that was any good, and the compact cameras weren't that great, comparatively speaking, and the DSLR got them more performance and so on and so forth. And subsequently, as time has gone on, they've stopped using their DSLRs and they've switched to using smartphones. Now, Not to sound too negative or that I'm bashing on these people, because I'm not. They're really smart people, but the reality is they were never photographers in the first place. They bought a DSLR because it was the best camera for the task that they wanted at the price point that they could afford, and it was a tool. And when the convenience and quality of their smartphone got to a point where the DSLR was too much size and weight and crap to carry around, they switched to the smartphone because they weren't out making art. They were out taking pictures of their kids growing up. And that market disappeared for the most part, which means that the people who are buying interchangeable lens cameras, mirrorless DSLR, well, mostly mirrorless at this point, are serious. And here's a cheap crap lens, introductory lens kind of thing, just doesn't work for those people. It's not the sort of market that you really want to sell. And granted, to an extent, you still need to have those lenses at the like $400 price point that kind of cover all the bases. So you have things like the RFS 10 to 18 and the 18 to 55 and the 55 to 200 or 250 or whatever it is. But that should be like the extent of that kind of slow. Certainly in the case of Canon, those lenses have gone from f3.5 to 4.5 or f3.5 to 5.6 to 5.6 to 6.3 or 4.5 to 6.3, or in some cases, like 5.6 to 7.1. They've gotten slower. Of course, their size in some cases has gotten smaller than the lenses of the past. The performance, especially in things like distortion, has gone completely out the window. Canon's 10 to 18 has so much distortion at 10 millimeters that it only uses about 80-ish% of your sensor. Distortion correction is a forced thing on that lens, as is increasingly becoming the case in mirrorless lenses. And this doesn't just belong to Canon. This applies to Sony. This applies to Nikon. Nikon is probably the least egregious of the brands that are doing this, but it's definitely happening almost everywhere. Canon, I think, is probably the most egregious of the brands, especially on the entry-level lenses. But yes, those lenses are kind of a staple thing. But the 28 to 70 f2.8 STM, IS STM, to me, is sort of where your entry-level benchmark for a lens kind of falls. And honestly, barring what we don't know about image quality, because I haven't seen any tests or reviews of it, there's a lot to be said about it. So it is light. 495 grams, I think that's just over a pound. In some ways, I almost think the Canon's a little more impressive in the sense that it also has in-lens optical image stabilization, which adds weight, and that's still a factor. And with the image stabilizer, the coordinated IS of the 28 to 70 f2.8, you get, checking notes, 5.5 stops on a camera like the R8 that doesn't have in-body image stabilization, and 7.5 stops on a camera like the R5 that does, or R5 Mark II that does, which, is pretty impressive. Canon is also saying, and I think this is another standard. So there's 2 points here. Canon is saying image quality like an L lens, and dust and weather sealing like an L lens. Now, to the first point, I think this is where the line should be maybe drawn more now than ever. Again, the bottom has fallen out, and so once you start talking about serious users are going to want better image quality. It's sort of, I think, part parcel and necessity of that process as a whole. I don't see a point as a serious photographer, unless you are specifically going for like a vintage look from a vintage lens, of investing your money, although investing is really not the right word here, buying an expensive, and this is an $1,100 lens that we're talking about, so it is not cheap. It's not bank breaking in some respects either, but it is definitely not a $400 lens. Buying a lens like that doesn't deliver solid image quality. So good image quality is something I think is a requirement basically across the board. That is a necessity. And this is somewhere that and quite honestly, I've had conversations with some of you all in the comments, tend to agree that Canon has fallen down a little bit in some places. Specifically, the RFS lenses like the 10 to 18, but it also is has happened in some of the very entry level RF lenses, the full frame ones, where distortion is going wild and it's corrected in software and we can do it and who cares, and it doesn't, that's fine. At least that's Canon's perspective. It's not necessarily my perspective. And I'm not personally going to recommend people go buy lenses that have so much distortion that they can only use 80% of the sensor area when you're taking a picture at the widest setting. I don't think that's a good deal for us as photographers. So obviously that's where the questions kind of come down on this lens is, they say L image quality, what does the actual deliverable, or what is the actual deliverable going to be? Now, the other point is dust and weather sealing. And this is, again, used to traditionally be an L lens thing. Canon has been building more and more of their non-L lenses with dust and weather sealing that they claim is to the L standard of dust and weather sealing. Now, first point on this, I would really like to see the CIPA, the Consumer Image Product Association, that's the Japanese trade group that all these cameras belong to, or ISO or somebody come up with a standard like the waterproof standards for like our phones, IP ratings or whatever. Maybe use the IP ratings, but actually start testing cameras and lenses for dust and weather sealing. They say it's there. They say the lens is dust and weather or resistant, but how good is it really? Just what kind of rainstorm can I get caught in without being able to put my camera in a dry bag before it is damaged by the water? Obviously, none of this stuff is submersible, so that's not even a consideration, but rain, snow, dust, it'd be nice to know. The second point here is that I really feel like this should be a standard thing now. Mirrorless lenses, in some respects, have far less necessity for holes and whatnot than lenses have previously, especially when you start getting into the focus rings. Everything's electronic focus, which means the focus ring doesn't even necessarily need to make a penetration through the watertight seal. The focus ring could be click-based and have magnets on it, and you use use a Hall effect sensor on the other side of a watertight plastic lens barrel to determine where the ring is and how it's being turned. There's lots of ways to go about doing that, but that's potentially one way to do it without having to put a hole in the lens. Zoom rings are obviously a little bit more difficult. So are the switches that need to be sealed or whatever. But we kind of start getting into we don't have distance windows anymore. So without a distance window, that's one less hole in the lens, that kind of thing. But I think this should be a standard thing now across the board. We are talking about, and again, reiterating the point, we're talking about lenses that cost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. Again, this is an $1,100 lens I'm talking about. The L lenses are more $2,300 or up, and certainly when you get to the big telephotos, we're talking about in excess of 10 grand. And I don't really care how rich you are or that you have insurance that covers this for work purposes, and therefore you just don't give a crap if the lens gets destroyed. The reality is that's not the situation for the vast majority of us. Most of us are not going to have, you know, professional photo insurance on our lenses so that when we go out, shoot something and it gets rained on and the lens stops working, we don't care. We call the insurance company. They say, buy a new one, here's the money, you know, or whatever. Or send it to get fixed and we'll cover it, you know, that kind of thing. Weather sealing adds that protection, the peace of mind for us to not have to worry as much about damaging our expensive glass. So having that on this lens, definite plus. Let's see. This is another lens in Canon's line where they just don't seem to care about the control ring. Now, I'm not sure how the control ring falls out really in the RF system. I like to have it. It moves around all the time. Some lenses are too small to have one, so they have dual function focus control rings. One of the things I've harped on in the past with all of this is consistency. From a user interface perspective, consistent locating or location, putting the control ring in a consistent location makes it something that can become muscle memory for the photographer. Moving it around all the time, changing how it works, changing what it does, not so great. This implementation I don't think is actually horrible. You have 3 positions on the controls, the manual focus or autofocus control switch, autofocus control and manual focus. My interpretation of them is when the lens is in autofocus, the focus ring is a focus ring and the lens autofocuses. When it's in control, the focus or the lens autofocuses and the control ring or the focus ring now is the control ring. And in manual focus, it should be in manual focus, obviously, with the control ring being focus again, because you need a focus ring when you're in manual focus. But I would like to see Canon become more consistent on what they're doing with the control rings. They're also advertising, going back to the image quality for a second, a minimal breathing design. And I have no idea what this actually means. I know what breathing is. I did a whole series on it, so that's not what I'm talking about. But minimal breathing, is that optically, or is that with a correction profile and software in cameras that support it? Now, hopefully what that means is optically. Again, I've talked about this in all of my breathing videos, but a little bit of breathing is not the end of the world. A lot of breathing is. So if the lens is actually delivering L quality image or L lens image quality and has the distortion kind of managed and under control in a sane way and does minimal breathing, that makes this a really strong lens, in my opinion, across the board. Whether you shoot videos or stills, that this would really work out. Now, if any of those things fall down, it still's probably going to be a really good lens. And given the size and weight, I still think it's rather interesting. But definitely not quite the thing that it could be, all things considered. So, to wrap this up, interesting lens. I'm actually interested in this, and that's kind of weird because 28 to 70s or general purpose zooms or whatever you want to call these are not my favorite lenses. They aren't really interesting to me. That said, I own 4 lenses in this category, two 24 to 70 2.8s, an EF and RF mount one, a 28 to 70 f2, and a 24 to 105 f4L, an EF mount from ages and ages ago. It's hard to argue the utility of them, and it's probably going to be hard to argue the utility of this lens given its size and weight, and thinking about traveling. And when I travel, I take my 24 to 70 2.8L because it's the smallest, lightest general purpose zoom I have, because as I said, the 24 to 105 I have is a very old, it's the first generation EF mount one. I really should get the RF mount one and replace the EF one, but this is smaller and lighter than the 24 to 105 f4, at least the L version. And faster. Doesn't have the long end, but that's depends on the user how important that is. So, like I said, I think this is actually a really interesting lens. And I think my point that I'm trying, or I'd like to try to make a drive home, is I think this really should be demonstrative of where the standard should be for entry-level lenses now, or at least the step above entry-level lenses. It shouldn't be the domain of the L lens to get f2.8 apertures, especially with high-resolution cameras where they're diffraction limited at f5.6 or 7.1, and you're already kind of hamstrung if you want to stop down past 5.6 if that's where the lens is stuck at. I would be thrilled to see Canon come out with a series of f2.8 lenses, full frame, in this vein. Granted, I don't expect them to be as good as their L counterparts would be, but f2.8 lenses in this vein for entry-level users. I think the floor, the bottom end of the photographers out there are coming up, and I think this would be a great way for Canon to make the platform, call it, look more attractive, if you will, to those people by basically saying, hey, this used to be the domain of the professional, but now we're going to make it something that is accessible to more and more people. So with that said, I'm going to wrap this up. If you have any thoughts on the camera, the lens, any of that kind of stuff, feel free to drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this kind of stuff as well. If this was interesting, or at least you got some insight out of this, let me know. Hit that like button. If this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, or any of the stuff that I talked about in the first part of upcoming stuff sounds like it might be useful or interesting to you, hit the subscribe button if you're not already. And finally, you can help and support this channel. It's always appreciated. You can help us for free by liking this video, leaving a comment, and sharing it with others on your social media network of choice, at least those you think would be interested in it. And you can help us, or you can support us directly by hitting that tip button. There's also a PayPal donate link in the description as well that works. Or, because I hate asking people directly for money, I just feels wrong to me or whatever, buy yourself something you always wanted from one of the affiliate links in the description below. It doesn't have to be camera gear. It could be anything you were already set on buying, but I get a small commission off of that to support the channel. You don't pay any more for it, which is great for you. It's great for me. It helps everybody all around, and it helps me keep making these videos. So with that said, I hope you all enjoyed this or got something out of this. And until next time, see ya.